Hello everybody, this is Intro You here, and this week we have the following question from the user MustacheMan12. Should out-of-bounds glitches and loopholes be kept for the fun of it, or corrected for game balancing purposes? This question is particularly relevant given a video I posted recently, in which I demonstrate a bug I discovered which entirely breaks avant-garde and survival. At the time I wasn't totally certain what to do with this knowledge, I could have kept it totally to myself, but it wasn't particularly complicated as bugs go. In fact, I'm genuinely amazed this hadn't been discovered during live, or if it was, we have literally no record of it. As a quick explanation, although I have a demonstration video up on the channel, I'm going to try and give a rough description of the bug and how precisely it works, although I should say that its precise mechanics we don't currently understand really. So, the animation for quick builds involves you throwing bricks from one spot onto the place where you're building. This animation only really makes any sense if your player is a certain distance away from the spot on which you're building. If you're right next to it, it's going to look a little weird that you're throwing all the bricks such a short distance in front of you. For this reason, the game decides to move your character to some distance away from the quick build before playing the animation. However, depending on how close you were to the quick build, the distance it would have to move you would be different. Many animations in the game do move your character about, but if you end the animation, you'll find your character still where it started, because the animation never actually moves your physics, just your visible position. Here, however, there's a problem with that. In the case of a quick build, the game can't just leave you where you are and play an animation, because animations aren't dynamic. The game wouldn't be able to update the animation to move you the correct distance away. Instead, the game is forced to physically move your character. This probably isn't the only reason it was done this way, physically moving the character that is, because moving the player into a given position also helps to stop people abusing quick builds to get out of bounds. Trust me, I've looked into that. But precisely why it was done is irrelevant. For whatever reason, this behaviour is now hard-coded into the client, and there's no way to change it from the server. I also note, when up above, I said it's to prevent people abusing quick builds to get out of bounds. I'm using this to get out of bounds, right? But there are other out-of-bounds glitches I could perform if it didn't work this way. Either way, there would be some sort of potential for an out-of-bounds glitch. The glitch basically seems to run with the following logic, as best I can tell from my various tests. When a quick build is built, the game attempts to move the player away from it until the player reaches some ideal radius. If the player hits a wall, they're pushed along the wall in the direction that moves them the furthest away. However, if a second wall appears in the player's path, the game sort of seems to ignore it, continuing along the first wall in an attempt to find a far enough spot. If you have a quick build in the right position, you can easily enough abuse this to clip through a wall. In avant-garde and survival, I managed this first time, and since you're now out of bounds from all enemies, you're completely safe to get as high a time as your computer's on for. And I specify that I managed it this first time because I have tested various other things, and certain clips are a lot harder to make than others. This one's a very, very easy one. So a slight caveat is that the developers didn't just place down quick builds anywhere, and so no normal quick builds will have this behaviour where they can push you out of bounds. However, the engineer has the ability to drop quick builds, and there's a consumable boom trap kit with the same ability which players can purchase, as well as, in theory, the same glitch being achievable using the turret quick builds dropped by mechs in survival, or just mechs anywhere, but particularly interesting for survival for obvious reasons. Actually, I'm now wondering, do they actually drop? I might be entirely wrong. Maybe the mechs in survival don't drop the turrets. I'd assume they would, but maybe they don't, because I know they don't drop imagination, etc. Anyway, that's me being sidetracked. So yeah, I went into a bit of detail there because I think it's interesting, and I hope you will too, but the mechanism is, to some extent, entirely beside the point. All that matters is that there does exist a glitch which can completely break avant-garde and survival, and it's one which would have existed in live. I tested the glitch in LCDRU at the time, which has correctly positioned physics volumes to repel players from trying to escape. But of course, the developers never intended players to pass through walls, so these physics volumes are totally ineffectual. All of which serves to confirm that this definitely would have been possible in live, although there were also other known tricks in live survival, so perhaps that explains why no one looked too hard for this. I then had a bit of a quandary. Myself and others pretty quickly realised this could be abused in a pretty huge sense, specifically in avant-garde and survival, and so removed everything and began to discuss what to do about it on a private channel. My major concern is about what happens if tons of people use this glitch. We're investigating this for the purposes of speedrunning, and there's nowhere else within LEGO Universe where this is actually really game-breaking, so it was just survival that remained a question. And honestly, the rewards weren't that great. Anyone with a high enough level to use the gear gained from pulling off this clip should already have had better gear anyway. But this was was still a concern. And the bug was easy enough to patch as well. Adding a few extra repulsive physics volumes to push players away from the walls at the edges would have interrupted the quick build mechanics that I discussed earlier and patched the bug entirely, along with various other solutions to check players within bounds. But our concern was, what if a project didn't patch this, since we had no guarantee that anyone would care enough to do so? And at that point, we had to start thinking about exactly this question. What are the ramifications of glitches which can potentially break the game? Or if they don't exactly break it entirely, at least which remove the challenge from aspects of the game. In this instance, it turned out to be something of a moot point for a few reasons. Firstly, both Dark Flame Universe and Operation Crooks have given us assurances that they do intend to patch this in survival. Darwin and I specifically had a call to discuss the bug shortly after. But also because this wasn't a question of actually patching the bug, but about whether or not we told people. And the thing is that eventually someone would have discovered this bug. It wasn't a particularly complicated, clever, or interesting bug, and so someone else would definitely have found it, given time. And in order to make things fair and prevent one person abusing it, we decided the best bet was for me to publish this, hence the video I posted on the topic at the time. But it's still an important question, because this isn't the only bug that people will find, I'm sure. In fact, given my love for the speedrunning community, I really hope it isn't. So this question is going to remain relevant for a while to come, I would suspect. And at this point, I like to split bugs into two categories. First, we have the game-breaking bugs, far more interesting to talk about. Bugs which let you do stuff which would otherwise be impossible, and which can be of a direct benefit to you as the player. And the second category, which is minor bugs. And so, although the mechanism is identical, this bug is only truly game-breaking in Avant Gardens, quite fortunately, since no amount of glitching out of bounds will actually help you at all anywhere else. Even the Battle of Nimbus Station requires you to smash enemies, and there's already a safe place where you can regen your health during the battle. Basically, it's a problem localized entirely to Avant Garden survival, and everywhere else is pretty minor. It might get you a speed advantage if you're clever and combine with a few of the other glitches I've found. Okay, small plug for the speedrunning server, I've listed a ton in there if you actually are interested in these other glitches I've discovered, but nothing here would give you an advantage other than a slight speed boost. So I guess for me, I feel players should be allowed to use minor glitches. I know DLU does not intend to patch the quip, or quick build clip. I just call it quip because that's a lot faster and I say it a lot. Outside of Avant Garden survival, because, well, you can already get out bounds from most other worlds in several different ways, so honestly, what's the point of patching this? And you'll gain nothing from going out of bounds, other than possibly a loss in immersion, which will only hurt you and your enjoyment of the game. So the question comes down to the glitches that people can use for their own significant personal gain, rather than just for things like speedrunning. I think most players would be of the opinion that any such glitches, say an infinite speed hack, which for the record is pretty much possible, okay, not infinite, but extremely high speed hack, and these should ideally be fixed. But what if there is no easy fix? In the case of speed hacks, there normally is, but what if there's no easy way for the devs to fix a particular hack? Say like the quip, it's almost entirely client-sided. What happens then? And here's where I think things get quite interesting, because there are a few effects of this we need to consider. Firstly, what happens for an individual player using this glitch, and what effect does it have on other players? Well, let's use the example of Avant Garden survival without a fix for this bug. AGS is a team minigame, and so it will be pretty obvious, especially as you can spectate the remaining players, at least I seem to remember you can, if someone were to be using this. For the player themselves, well, they could easily get the world record, but there'd be no point just going high after that, so they'd just sit there for a little while and then leave. There'd be no desire to beat any new world records anyone else sets if someone else found the glitch as well and beat theirs, because the player now knows there's literally no skill involved, so there's not really any incentive to keep abusing this. And the same goes for quite a few glitches, with the notable exception of anything which can get you money, or anything which you can trade. So there's the first important part. If all you can get is a place on a leaderboard, there's no incentive to really do it. But what about for your teammates? Well, they've just had to sit around dead whilst you explore Avant Garden survival, maybe inspecting parts of the terrain where the monument should be, but somehow isn't. If they leave the game, they lose the time they worked hard for whilst they were fighting without one of their players, because you'd already glitched out bounds, but staying on isn't the most interesting for them. Their immersion's totally broken, but they don't understand the glitch, so they're most likely left feeling annoyed by the whole thing. And this is the greatest risk here. Every bug will break the immersion for the player executing it, but to some extent, I think that's fine. The vast majority of people will probably either not know about the bug, or choose not to use it if they want to keep their immersion. The issue is when it begins to affect other players, because that's the point where it can genuinely damage the community, and after having gone to all this effort to get LEGO Universe back up, the developers really don't want suddenly no one to want to play their game because it's so glitched and buggy. So let's look at how we could do that. Well, we can affect other players in a few ways. You can either affect them with money or with status, since those are pretty much the only two things with any real persistence in LU. And so, what happens? Well, here's the interesting thing. The answer lies pretty much entirely in economics. If you can get yourself a large supply of rare items, you sell them for money to a vendor, or you could sell them to other players, which would often be the far more profitable option. For instance, the price you could get for a parrot by selling it to a vendor would be so much lower than selling it to another player because they were rare items. That was sort of how the metagame worked back in LU. However, in general, this is going to be fine. The trading system will still work the same. Sure, this one player will get more money, but honestly, that doesn't really affect other players. It certainly doesn't affect the majority, who will still be getting the same deal as if they'd bought it from any other player. That then remains true, up until the point where people begin to notice these aren't as rare anymore. Eventually the price goes down as inflation takes hold, devaluing the particular item. But if we've reached this point, we've also reached the point where a large number of people know about the glitch, which would be necessary in order to saturate the market. In other words, suddenly everyone knows about this bug and it becomes worthless since everyone can do it. However, I guess there's one problem to this. This relies on economics to devalue the use of a bug, which requires players. Now, most of the time, this is guaranteed. You're far better off selling parrots to a player than to a vendor. Once the price goes down, eventually it becomes worth it to just sell to a vendor, and the game's suddenly changed. Now you might as well make yourself rich by selling to vendors. At this point, it becomes a bit of a grind, since things don't go for as high a price when you're selling to vendors as opposed to players, but you can probably still manage it. So what happens then? Well, oddly enough, the worst thing you could do would be to give money away. If you just kept the money for yourself, not too much would happen. You could mess around with the market, but you could only buy yourself items from other players and from vendors, and that's only fun for so long. It's certainly not going to destabilize the entire economy and ruin the fun for other people. However, giving them away will be far more damaging, since it would again break the challenge of the game for newer players and totally break their immersion, which would damage the community as a whole. Also, there becomes a saturation point where everyone using this glitch is richer than those not using it, and there are enough of those that if you're a normal user bidding on something, you simply cannot compete. If half the player base has 10 times as much money as everyone else, one part of the player base is going to be significantly disadvantaged. Fortunately, however, this has to become pretty widespread for that to be a problem, and at that point, it actually becomes pretty simple to counter. The only way of getting large amounts of money for very little effort, really, is by selling the rare stuff to vendors. However, whilst the vendors break the normal laws of supply and demand, eventually the devs will be informed. In order for this to become a huge problem, well, you're going to need lots of people doing it, and the secret will get out. Since buying and selling is totally server-side, all a developer has to do is reduce the sale price of whatever it is you've been glitching. But again, this doesn't work perfectly. I genuinely, when writing that paragraph, thought it would, but this just ends up penalising the people who are obtaining this legitimately, eventually forcing those players to learn the glitch themselves, breaking immersion and enjoyment again. And just like every other outcome, this loses people from the community. There are two other types of bugs which also affects players, however. Anything letting you kill steal and anything involving leaderboards. Fortunately, I think the speedrun community is pretty much the perfect counter to the problem of leaderboards, since we know the glitch is available. Often we've discovered them, and we require stronger evidence because we know people can abuse things like that. If you care about your position on leaderboards, you can just record yourself and get verified by the community. No one's necessarily going to trust that leaderboard of the event guard and survival. So that's pretty much fine. Kill stealing could in theory be a problem, but for the fact that smashing things for other players passes directly through the server. If I smash something on my screen, that doesn't mean it's been smashed for anyone else. The server has to verify it first, and that means that any bugs you do find could be patched on the server. The last thing to say, really, is that all the economic thinking above also comes down to this same point. You'll only ever get stuff because it's given to you by the server. Whatever glitches you pull off, you'll still need to fight enemies to get a reliable source of income and rewards. So no matter how cleverly you glitch, it's still going to require a grind. At which point, genuinely, what's the point compared to anything else? So I guess that's sort of my response to this. Ideally, I think everyone wants game-breaking bugs fixed. Minor bugs which require a lot of skill for little rewards, they can probably stay since they're not really worth the time to fix, which is also quite fortunate for the speedrun community. In terms of major bugs, I genuinely don't think we'll have anything too dangerous. Bugs like the avant-guarded survival bug will get you far less than 10,000 coins, which is a drop in the ocean when it comes to affecting large numbers of players, and most other bugs can be patched relatively easily server-side. For instance, the model pack bug from Live, where you could cheaply buy a model pack for faction tokens, then sell its contents for a large amount of money, was patched in Live pretty much entirely from the server. It would have required a client database update, but DLU can certainly manage that. The technology's out there for any server to manage that, and whilst you can manually restore your old client database, the servers won't manage your money, and which will remove it from your account so you'll be tricking no one other than yourself. In summary, I guess LU seems to be quite a hard game to entirely break. Since it was made for kids, the ways of getting money are all very simple and standard, and they happen to all be controlled from the server, making them quite easy to patch. That leaves you with only minor glitches, and in my personal opinion, they're not too bad. Most people don't want to speedrun the game, so you're unlikely to find a ton of speedrunners just running around and to have that break people's immersion. And even if you did, it's solely visual. They're doing nothing to affect you personally other than appearing on the screen. They can't trap you in games with the event-guarded survival, and they can't damage the economy. In other words, I think minor bugs are probably safe, which is brilliant news for out-of-bounds parties. But one other thing which is interesting to note with the case of speedrunning is, well, the same reason I set up the speedrunning community to begin with, which is the fact that it just adds replayability. If you see someone speedrunning, you may wonder how they did that, and because we make all of the tricks we use public, well, if you're interested in that Viceski's channel, which is linked in the description, so Viceski's my editor if you don't know, he literally has various videos describing how different tricks are done, and I think I've got one on the channel somewhere, and some where I investigate this. There's lots of information out there on it. So yeah, I don't think speedrunning is ever going to pose a problem. The entire reason it exists is hopefully to keep people interested in the game and to add replayability to it to begin with. So yeah, I'm hoping it won't break people's immersion too much. Anyway, with that, a huge thanks to MustacheMan12 for this week's question. As always, the developer channels are in the description. Show them your support because they're the ones who are making all of this possible, not me. Again, all of these questions come from people in the comment section. I recently had a brilliant suggestion by the user by the name of Quantum Brick, which is that I check out the frequently asked questions on the DLU forum specifically. But if you do have a question, throw it in the comment section because I will see these far more often than I'll see the FAQ section, and I will check here first. Basically, these will always be my priority. And with that, thank you very much for listening. I've been Intro, and I will hopefully see you around.